The shot has run out, and Lee Oswald falls.
I'm Gary Delaune, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
I wouldn't leave San Antonio under any condition now. Well, I had a very interesting childhood, I guess you could say, because I was born in 1933, June 20th, at my aunt's house in Olathe, Kansas, because we lived on the farm. And my dad was a veteran of World War I. We were caught in the Depression like everyone. I was born during the Depression, so we were pretty poor. So we moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico during the war, and my dad got a job at Los Alamos, the atomic bomb, Los Alamos, and I didn't know anything about where he worked. I went to Santa Fe elementary school, and I was one of either 5 or 6 Anglos in the entire class. They were Navajo or Hispanic. But I never knew what my dad did or where he worked. He couldn't say, or we wouldn't ask him. But in those days, it was a dirt road going up the side of the mountain to Los Alamos, and no guardrail, and he'd be a nervous wreck when he got home. So he stayed there. I forget how many months he was at Los Alamos, but they told him we'd have to move up there for the duration of the war if he stayed there. Well, my mother wouldn't do it because she had a very ill mother back in Kansas. So after he worked there a while, he had to leave because we wouldn't move. So we moved back to Kansas, and we moved to Oklahoma City. We lived in many states. My dad was able to do many things, so even though we were poor, he could get a pretty good job sometimes. And so we moved back to Oklahoma City. That's where I went to my last year of elementary school. I went to 11 different schools. My brother went to 12. We moved around so much. And from middle school, I went to Capitol Hill High School for a year and a half, and then we moved to Lawrence, Kansas, back to Lawrence. We moved out in the country. We had owned a country store, and I played basketball and tennis at Lawrence High School. And then after I got out of Lawrence, my brother was already in the Army. He was a lieutenant during the Korean conflict. And so after Lawrence, I decided I wanted to play basketball in college. I went to the University of Kansas for my first year. Thought I was good enough to play. I wasn't. So I went to Baker on a scholarship, stayed a short time, and told my mother, I said, I don't want to stay at Baker. She said, do what you want to do. So I went back to KU and struggled through my first year trying to play basketball. I'd practice every day with Dean Smith, who was the legendary coach later at North Carolina. He was on the KU team that won the national championship. My cousin was on a scholarship in basketball, but he was 6'5", and I grew 3 inches out of high school. I was only 5'9½". I grew 3 inches, but I stayed my first year at KU. It wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to go into journalism and communications. They had a pretty fair journalism school, but nothing in communications. A friend of mine, one of my best friends in Lawrence, we decided we'd go to California for the summer of '52. We drove to California and stayed a short time, and I got a call from my brother, said, I've got you enrolled at OU, but you've got to get back here now, because I'd always wanted to go to OU after living in Oklahoma City. So I went back to OU and enrolled in their communications department. They had radio, speech, and television all together, and then I majored in English and journalism, majored in communications. So I stayed there for 4 years and got a job. I was sports director for the campus station. Every university has a campus station. So I was sports director, and that was when Oklahoma won 47 in a row. So that was a great time to be at OU. But after OU, I signed up for the Naval OCS in Rhode Island. I'd taken ROTC, but I signed up for Naval OCS in Newport, Rhode Island, and I'd flown to Dallas to take my physical. But before I could get to Newport, Rhode Island, I got my draft papers. And so instead of being in Newport thinking I was going to be an ensign in the Navy, I was at Fort Bliss, Texas as the lowest of privates. And then from Fort Bliss, I went to Fort Hood, and I became the MC of all the camp shows, entertainment. I'd be the MC for our shows in Killeen or Temple to promote the Army. And I got really sick one day on the firing range, and I was really ill. And the sergeant thought I was faking it because I was doubled up. We were shooting 50 caliber machine guns. But he made me walk to the infirmary, which was about 3 miles, because he thought I was gold bricking, as he said. Found out I had a bad ulcer, about the size of a quarter. I was given an option. I could stay in the Army, and they would do the operation on my ulcer and remove it. It was in the duodenum. I was in the bed next to a sergeant who had just had it done. And he pulls up his shirt and said, "Don't let him do this to you." And he had a big X in the stomach, and he said, don't do it. So I decided not to have it operated on, and I took the option of getting my medical discharge. So I did. But it was at a bad time. My brother was in dental school, and my sister-in-law was pregnant. And the night I got home from the Army, my mother fell and ruptured her spleen. We didn't think she was going to live, so it was just chaos from that point on. And so in the meantime, I couldn't get a job out of the Army. I finally found one in Muskogee, Oklahoma, before Merle Haggard ever recorded his song. And I stayed there 5 or 6 months and decided that, I didn't want to be a DJ in Muskogee, Oklahoma very long. So I enrolled at the Pasadena Playhouse in Pasadena, California, where I wanted to get rid of a speech twang. Sounded like I was from Texas or Oklahoma or someplace. I didn't want to sound like that. So I enrolled at Pasadena Playhouse. Well, I found out that great actors had gone. Now, I didn't want to be an actor. I wanted to be in sports or news. So I went to Pasadena for the summer, and that's where Earl Holliman went, Barbara Rush, Robert Young, many, many other great stars. Anyway, I worked there a short time, and I was selected to be in a showcase for Pasadena Playhouse because apparently they liked what I did on stage. So we were doing a show called Our Town. And one night, my roommate and I had tickets to the Maury Amsterdam show in LA at KTLA. So we went there and got there early. And I was sitting in the front row, and a gentleman came in who was guest on the show that night and sat next to him, and he was an old-time character actor. I'd seen him in hundreds of movies. His name was Will Wright. And we got to talking and found out we had so much in common. He was of Scotch-Irish heritage. He was a World War I veteran, and he was also a Mason, but all things that my dad was. So we got to talking, and I told him what I was doing, and he said, I was a classmate of Thornton Wilder in high school, who wrote Our Town and many other plays. And he had also given Meredith Willson his first job, Meredith Willson, who wrote and composed Music Man. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm going to Pasadena Playhouse. I'm trying to improve myself." He said, "You're wasting your time." He wanted to see the play because he hadn't seen it for a long time. He said, "I'd really like to see that." Well, I had a '53 Plymouth. It was an old car I'd bought out of the Army. So I go to his nice home in North Hollywood, and I pick him up and take him over on a Saturday night to see Our Town. And on the way home, on the way back to his house, he said, "I think you need to do something else." He said, that's not for you. He said, "Let me see what I can do next week." And so he called CBS in Hollywood. He had a good friend, one of the department heads, and he told him who I was, and he said, offer him a job. Well, he did. He said, I called him on Monday. He said, "I'm going to offer you a job because everybody at CBS starts either in the mailroom or as an usher at TV City." Well, I didn't want to go to TV City as an usher, so I said, "I'll take the mailroom job at CBS Radio." Well, it's a great move on my part because I got to deliver mail to Ben Crosby, to Bob Crane, who did Hogan's Heroes. I became a good friend. I had coffee with him every morning. And I met all these actors, and Tom Harmon, the great All-American, who was Mark Harmon's father, by the way. And so I worked as a mail boy and got to know people and all the character actors. And Mr. Wright, in the meantime, would take me out on location. I'd go to Warner Brothers or Universal. He was in all the movies. I got to see Alias Jesse James, Bob Hope being filmed. We went to Tales of Wells Fargo. Dale Robertson was an Oklahoma City boy. When he met me, he liked me. He said, "I went to Yukon." He was from Yukon, Oklahoma, outside Oklahoma City. So Dale became a close acquaintance of mine. And so in the meantime, Jim Racer became my best friend. He was writer, producer, director of CBS Radio Sports in LA and KNX and CBS. So in addition to doing my mailroom duties, I would go out and cover a really like a junior college game, and I'd give a report on, and I started writing for CBS Radio. And so I stayed there about 5 or 6 months doing that. So he called me in one day, and he said, Pat McGurk was the director of CBS Radio Sports. He said, "You're the youngest guy we've ever offered a job like this." I was 25. He said, "We're going to offer you this job as radio director, writer, producer of the Roy Story Show." So when you're in the business, as you well know, you kind of emulate somebody. Well, when I was a little kid at 12 in Oklahoma City, I had a little Philco radio, and every day I would listen to the baseball game of the day on Liberty Broadcast System. And the guy that did the games was a man called Gordon McClendon, who was a radio genius. He owned several stations, KTSA, San Antonio, KILT, Houston, and some other radio stations. So Gordon was the greatest purveyor of the written word I've ever heard. He would simulate or actually reactivate a game. They had the Western Union ticker tapes in those days. And it always described, very brief, it would say, Brank on the hill, at bat comes, Duke Snyder. And that's all it would say. And then it'd say, single, right field. Well, Gordon would fabricate things, or he'd make them up. He'd say, "Hello, everybody, beware, this is the old Scotsman, Gordon McClendon. It's a rain-swept afternoon at Wrigley Field in Chicago. The ivy-covered wall provides a proscenium, a backdrop for these combatants, the Cubs against the Pirates." I was 12 years old, man. I listened to that, and he hooked me. I said, that's what I want to do when I was 12. Because when I was 4 or 5, my parents said I used to be off in a room somewhere, and back in those days, they didn't have the great games that they have today and electronic, all that. You'd have to spin a little wheel, and it would tell you what happened. Like they'd have all the Babe Ruth, Joe DiMaggio, and I'd be in the room by myself, and I'd be describing a game when I was 5 or 6 years old. My parents would be hearing this voice, and it was me in the bedroom. So that's when I really planted the seed, and then listening to Gordon every day and hearing the command of the English language. And I found out that you had to paint the picture where the audience could imagine everything that you said, and they were right there. And he would say, "Oh, here's the pitch. He swings, it's a foul ball going down the right field line. Oh, look there, that little lady in the red hat, she just captured a souvenir from this baseball game today." And he made all this up. He was my idol when I was 11, 12 years old, listening to him. Little did I know that someday I would be working for him and writing things for him. So anyway, Pasadena, Playhouse, CBS Radio, promotion to the big job, my dream job. Well, my 2 roommates were both city boys, and of course I'd been on the farm and I knew how to ride a horse. They wanted to go up this dude ranch in Lucerne Valley, California. And I said, okay, we'll go up there and spend a weekend. So we went up there, and there were a bunch of women Marines staying there that weekend from El Toro Marine Base in California. Well, since I was an experienced rider, and all these women Marines are on horses, as were my 2 roommates, Saul and Dick Steppens, he said, the owner of the ranch said, "Gary, we're going to give you this horse. You're the only one here can handle him." And I said, as I got in the saddle, I said, famous last words. And the last thing they saw, they said, I don't remember anything, but they said I told the guide, I said, "This horse is feisty. I'm going to have to take him out. I can't trust him," because we were up in a rugged country, Big Bear Lake, California. And so I took him out, and Les said the last thing he saw as he went up to turn on the night lights for the dude ranch, I was headed over some hill going lickety-split. And about 30 minutes or 40 later, everybody came back from the trail ride, and the horse came back without me. And a woman Marine found me lying over somewhere off the trail. My clothes had all been ripped off because the horse had dragged me through the brush and everything. They theorized that he may have brushed against a tree or something and knocked me out of the saddle. And what saved my life was my cowboy hat, and I had a big split right here in my skull. And so they rushed me to the hospital, 22 miles to the nearest hospital. They thought I was in convulsions. They thought I was going to die. So they took me to this little hospital, and little Catholic hospital in Lucerne Valley, California. And since they didn't have an emergency room, they put me in the woman's delivery room, because that was the most private place they had. And I was there over 2 weeks, and they thought that they didn't know if I was going to make it or not. And then I had to go to they said, you got to be rehabilitated. Well, here I was, the job that I was waiting for, and I'm injured. Well, my whole attitude changed. The brain injury caused something. And so I decided I didn't want to stay in California. Well, to make it ironic, I had to have a private place to go. Well, I had met a cowboy actor named Jimmy Wakely, who was also from Oklahoma City. And Jimmy had worked with Gene Autry and some of the great radio stars, and he owned his own production company. And he lived next door to, down the street from Bob Hope, and also Gordon McRae. So Jimmy Wakely offered to take me to his house to recover, because I didn't know what was going on. Lost my speech, my balance. And so the doctor said, no, you have he had a 13-year-old son. He said, you can't take him because he has to have total isolation. Well, Will and Nell Wright took me to their home in North Hollywood and nursed me back to health for over 2 weeks or 3. I don't know how long I was there. Couldn't remember anything. Lost my speech. They said I'd called 5 or 6 people when I was so ill, so injured. I don't know who it was, never did. And I talked to my brother apparently and my mother, and I told them not to come out, that I was fine, but I wasn't fine. So anyway, I went to CBS. The first day I got back to CBS, I went to Jim Racer. I said, Jim, I'm going home. He said, don't go. He said, you're going to be our new sports writer director. I'm going home. I'm leaving. And for some reason, the doctor told me, though, he told my roommates, he said, keep an eye on Gary because of this brain injury. So what I did in my little 53 Plymouth, I packed up all my stuff, left LA at early morning, drove all day into Arizona, I'd stop 30 minutes and sleep 30 minutes because I was so, with a brain injury like that. I'd pull off the side of the road and sleep, and then drive and pull off and sleep. I got to Albuquerque, my brother was practicing dentistry there, and he didn't know me when I went in. I was so emaciated and everything. So, but that ended my California career, and I look back and I think, well, the Lord didn't want me there. So I went on back to Albuquerque, worked there. My brother had me in rehab, watched after me every day, and then I got a temporary job at Channel 2 in Albuquerque, worked there a short time, and then went back to Oklahoma City and enrolled at OU to work on my master's. I said, well, I got to do something. I couldn't get a job. I got a job at WKY, which was the top station in Oklahoma, but because of my speech and my mixed up mind, I could write it, but I couldn't talk fast. There was a rapid delivery type thing. So after 2 weeks, the guy said, you're never going to make it in this business. You better look for another job. So I left WKY. I wasn't doing anything. I was going to go, as I said, to class at OU. And I had taken some tapes to Dallas because, well, I'll just take some of these tapes. And Tom Harmon, Bob Crane of Hogan's Heroes, they'd all written letters of recommendation for me. So I took these tapes to Dallas, left one at WFA, and I got a call one day. It was in the second week of June. He said, his name was Bill Crowdis, and I had auditioned for him. He said, Gary, when can you come to work? I said, I can be there next Monday. It was on my birthday, 1960. He said, I'll be truthful with you. He said, yours wasn't the best tape. But he said, I thought you needed some kind of a break because you've had some tough luck. And so he gave me a job to go to Dallas. Well, that was in 1960. I went to WFA to do high school football and news. They'd never done high school football in Dallas at WFA. So I did. I did the first season there and had a chance to go to KLIF. Who owned KLIF? Gordon McClendon. And so Gordon heard the tape and he said, hire him. He didn't know who I was from Adam. So that's what I did. I went to work at KLIF. I worked my way from being just a regular news guy into sports as well, and started doing high school football for a little station in McKinney. So I worked with the Dallas Texans for 2 years. In 61, 62, I got a tip that the Dallas Texans were going to move to Kansas City. And so I checked all my sources, and sure enough, they were in Kansas City. Lamar Hunt, who owned the Texans, Hank Stram, who was the coach, and some of the other executives were in Kansas City to sign the deal. So I broke the story. I copyrighted the story that the Dallas Texans were moving to Kansas City. And so then after that, KLIF became the flagship station for the Cowboys in '63. So I became the color man for the Cowboys in '63 and '64. And of course, we know what happened November 22nd, 1963. And that's when my career changed. And that's when I became a real newsman and reporter. And of course, the assassination, Jack Ruby was a big fan of KLIF, was looking for me when he came to the police department to bring me sandwiches. That's when he first saw Lee Harvey Oswald. And he forgot all about me. He kept asking around if they'd seen me because he went down in the basement. That's where they took him for the lineup, Lee Harvey. I was by myself in the station when President Kennedy arrived at Love Field. So I did the news, and I had it all ready to go. I said, as if by some heavenly omen, the sun broke through the overhanging clouds, and President Kennedy asked that the bubble top on the limousine be removed so he could see the people of Dallas and show that he loved Dallas. Well, they'd taken out all kinds of ads, you know, the John Birch Society and the right-wingers or whatever. So anyway, Joe Long was at the airport, and I get a call on the phone hotline. The rule was we always started the big 24-hour tape machine whenever you had a phone call in the newsroom. I said, Delaune, KLIF News, and the caller said, what do you know about shots being fired at the motorcade with Kennedy and Connally being hit? I don't know, but I'll find out. Well, number one, I didn't start the tape as was directed, as I should have done. Number two, I didn't say, who is this? I didn't find out who it was. But I did call the police department, my contact, Dorothy Plimpton. She said, yes, we do have a report. Well, I went on the air with it, and Ferris Rookstool, who was the analyst for the FBI for many years studying the Warren Report, he contacted me in about 2011 or 12 and said, after all these years of studying the Warren Report, you were the first reporter to announce on radio that Kennedy had been shot. And I said, well, I never claimed that. He said, no, but I talked to everybody that I know, plus we had two guys monitoring KLIF since we were the #1 station. When my report came out that he'd been shot, they headed right for the Texas School Book Depository. So he said that all the reports of the Warren Report, et cetera, showed that I was the first one to report it. And so it, as you well know, became chaos. And I fed maybe 300 stations or more that day, maybe 350, including the Canadian Broadcasting System, the BBC. And so I was by myself until Joe and Roy Nichols got back from the airport. They sent me to the police department because I had the contacts. And so as a result of that, I would get tips all the time. Well, Jack Ruby was a big supporter of KLIF, big fan. And he also, he was a little Jewish guy, insignificant. He wanted to be a martyr. And he went to the Dallas Morning News after the shots were fired at Kennedy and hung around there for a while and then raced over to KLIF. Well, I was over there for hours. You can imagine how chaotic it was. Because I think my bulletin was at 12:33, I'm not sure, but I interrupted a song called I Have a Boyfriend.
This KLIF bulletin from Dallas, 3 shots reportedly were fired at the motorcade of President Kennedy today near the downtown section. KLIF News is checking out the report. We will have further reports. Stay tuned.
So I interrupted that with the bulletin, and when they got back, I went to the PD, police department, and stayed there for hours and hours. So Jack was making a nuisance of himself. I mean, because he wanted to be a big shot. KLIF News, Jack Ruby, can I help you? He started answering the phone. But so did everybody else, salespeople, the clerks and the girls and everything. So somebody said, to get rid of him, he said, what can I do, what can I do? Gary Delaune's been at the police department for hours. Can you take him something to eat or drink? Yeah. Well, Jack goes out to the Delicatessen on Cedar Springs. And he gets, I didn't know for years what kind of sandwich it was he was trying to bring me. He ordered a sack full of corned beef sandwiches. And so he leaves the barbecue and goes to the police department and somehow found his way down to the basement. I'm on the 3rd floor making reports from the press room. He goes into the basement where the lineup room is, and he started asking about me, where I was, and nobody said anything. So he saw him bringing in Lee Harvey Oswald. And there are pictures of Jack in some of the video where he's in the back of the room, he's looking at Lee Harvey Oswald. So he said that's when he first started thinking about Jim Lavelle, who was handcuffed to Oswald and the investigator for both the Kennedy shooting and the shooting of J.D. Tippit. He said, Jack, why did you do it? He said, because I wanted to kill that SOB to avenge Jackie Kennedy, to give her some peace of mind. He wanted to be a big shot. It was unbelievable how chaotic it became, the whole city of Dallas. And so I went back to the station all day Saturday after the arrest of Oswald. And I was just worn out. I don't remember the show, the stories I gave at all. I don't remember at all about Saturday. But on Sunday morning, since I'd worked all Friday night and Saturday, the news director, Joe Long, said, don't worry about coming back. Don't worry about the transfer. It's going to happen at early morning. Well, Chief Curry was going to transfer him at 4:30. They were going to put him in an armored car. That's what everybody thought. They were going to use that as a decoy, take him on down to the sheriff's office. Well, the network guys got together and he went to Curry and said, oh, Chief, this is a big story. This is a national story. Can we get you to transfer that during the time when everybody's watching instead of 4:30 in the morning? He said, oh, I'll do it at 9:30. He relented. So I woke up about 5 o'clock, or maybe earlier, and I had just been married about 3 months. And my wife said, where are you going? I said, I'm going downtown. She said, Joe told you not to come. I said, I got a feeling. I've got to go. So I go down to the KLIF studios, which is about 2 blocks from the police station, and I get there and I take a recorder and I walk over to the police department, go down the ramp, and how Jack got in, he was at the Western Union office a half a block down the street because one of his strippers needed money, so he wired her money, $50, I think, to pay her rent in Fort Worth. So Jack wired the money, and they had very little security outside. They had 2 cops on each side of the police department. One went down ramp into the basement, the other one up ramp going out to the other side. So Jack saw this car coming in, turning left into the basement. Well, he got down and kind of frog walked where they couldn't see him and goes down the ramp. Everybody knew Jack Ruby. I mean, the cops all knew him, a lot of them did. Like he hung around the radio and TV stations. So anyway, he goes down there. Well, we have a camera about 4 times the size of this one. That's when you had to move him all over the place. And it was the pool camera right in the middle as they were going to escort Oswald out of the basement office. The car was to back down like this, and they were supposed to meet at the same time, and they were going to push Lee Harvey down to the floorboard and go out. Well, they were using an armored car as a decoy because there had been all kinds of threats that they were going to kill Oswald. Well, first off, the armored car was too tall and it didn't clear the air conditioning duct, so they had to pull it back out. And so they were backing the Galaxy down, and I had got over there in plenty of time. I'm in a group of about 4 or 5 of us on this side of the big camera. Jack Ruby frog walked into this side over here. Well, what's Jack doing here? I want everybody knew Jack. So he's over there on this side. I didn't see him at all. Bob Huffaker and some of the other reporters over here, and I'm over here. Jim Lavelle, who was handcuffed to Oswald, didn't know who it was. You can imagine strobe lights like this one here hitting you in the face. All Jim saw was this gun down the side, and he saw it come up like this. He jerked Oswald because he was handcuffed to Oswald. Plus he had his hand in his belt. He jerked him like this, and the bullet went in right here, as you will see in the picture. And he said, Gary, if I hadn't jerked him, maybe it wouldn't have killed him. I don't know. But anyway, nobody knew who it was at first because Jack took a step and a half and bang, 38, one shot. Jim Lavelle and I recreated the steps that Jack made from the Western Union. It took us 1 minute and 38 seconds, I believe, to get from the corner down to the basement where he would have gone in. And so I'm knocked back over a rail. Bob Jackson continues to shoot the pictures, and everybody jumps on Oswald. They pull Oswald, and they grab Ruby and jump on him. And so they take Oswald back into the office, and they take Jack into the upstairs area elevator. And so everybody's got their guns out. As you see in the picture, all these cops are around, and so it reverberates, only one bullet, but it sounded like it was a couple of bullets because, it goes, boom, and it echoes through the basement. So as soon as I could, they cordoned us off. And I don't know how many minutes went by, and they let us go. Well, in the meantime, I started my recorder as I saw Will Fritz come out, and I've got some audio of that. I said, here he comes, led by Captain Will Fritz of the Homicide Division, the accused assassin.
Captain Will Fritz leading the way. Being escorted by police officers and...
About that time, bang.
The shot rang out. The shot has rung out. And Lee Oswald falls. Lee Oswald has fallen. A shot has rung out here.
After a few minutes, they let us all released. And so I run up the ramp, and I run down to the corner, back around, about a block and a half. I ran as fast as I could, and I don't know how many minutes had gone by from the shooting scene. The only thing live was the network pool camera, because back in those days, we didn't have wireless mics or connection, especially from a basement. So I get back, and the quality's not very good, but we have it. Because during the trial of Jack Ruby, it was chaos. They had people got there early so they could go into the courtroom. They only had a number of seats that were allowed to be used by the public. So one day, I got down on my knees, and it was so crowded, and I made my way underneath, and as Jack went by, I said, Jack, do you want Joe Tonhandle on the case? Well, he used a couple of profanities, and he didn't know who it was because he just yelled back, said, no, I don't want him on there. Hell no, I don't want him on there. So they called me to testify in his appeal in 1964 after he was found guilty. So I said, Gary Delaune, KLIF News. Well, Jack was sitting about where you are. I said, Gary, where were you, man? I was looking for you. Where were you? I said, Jack, you just couldn't find me. So people said, was he looking for you? That's the first time. So the New York Times and other publications that Jack Ruby was looking for me when he came to the police department. That's why he was there that night. So it was just sheer chaos. And, to think that was in 63 and 64, but because of my contacts at the PD, and that's what people today don't understand, these young journalists, you got to nurture your clients and your sources. It was one thing after another. KLIF was the #1 station in Dallas. If Dallas sneezed or coughed, the dial went to 1190 because we were the station. And we had morning DJs that were the top in North Texas. Our news staff was good. We had 2 news units, and we covered Dallas like a blanket. And you're talking about a different era, 1962, 60. I was there from the last of 60 through 65. And I left KLIF, in all truthfulness, I left there because they announced that I was going to be the voice of the Cowboys in 1964. And instead they hired Jay Randolph, who was the son of Senator Randolph, because he'd done so many favors for Gordon. He said, I want some reciprocity. I want you to hire my son to do the Cowboys. Well, Gordon called me and asked me to come to his office. He said, I can't get out of this, Gary. He said, I'm sorry, we know you were going to be the voice. Well, so I said, I'll do color, all right? So I did a color with Jay, but Jay and I didn't get along too well. Unfortunately, he's a nice guy, but he knew I was supposed to be the voice, and that kind of, I think, always affected our relationship. But Eddie Barker over at Channel 4 in Dallas, they were the old conservative type radio TV station. They wanted to hype up their news coverage, and they'd heard my news with the colorful phrases, and it was the fulminating funnel furrowed its way through West Texas today, leaving devastation, or I'd say a shattering collision, has left death lurking on the streets of Dallas tonight. And that's what they wanted to make it more colorful, because they'd just rip and read off the wire. So I went to Channel 4, and I became the Sunday night Cowboy reporter after a Cowboy game. I did all the TV highlights for the Cowboys at Channel 4 because Frank Gleber had gone to Cleveland as the voice of the Cleveland Browns. So I was there for 2 years, and I got a call one day from Houston. And I'd been, what's coincidental is the fact that I've been recommended for a radio job in Houston for both news and sports. They wanted me to be news and sports director for 2 stations in Houston by one of my competitors at Channel 8. I was at Channel 4 in Dallas. So I went to Houston, and because of it, it was the 5th largest market in the nation at the time. So I took the job as news and sports director for the 2 stations, radio. I left TV. If I had to do it over again, I don't know, I probably would have still done it. But I went to Houston, became the voice of the Astrodome for 4 years. I did all the Astros, the Oilers, every event that was in the Astrodome. I was a PA guy. And then I was on the phone one day, and Slater Martin asked me to be the voice of the Houston Mavericks of the ABA. And so I became the voice of the Mavericks. That first year of the ABA, they had the Dallas Chaparrals, who later became the San Antonio Spurs. And I did the Bo Hagen show on television for Rice University, and had all the contacts in Houston. And of course, it was a prestigious job being news director and sports director for 2 stations. I just couldn't handle the pressure. And we just had a little baby girl. And so I walked in one day and handed in my resignation. And I continued to work at the Astrodome until I got the call here in San Antonio from Bob Rogers, who was news director at Channel 5. And I took a tremendous pay cut to come over here, but I was just freelancing in Houston. So I had to, it was K-News, KNUZ, and KQUE, which was down on Caroline and Blodgett. And I got caught in the TSU riots. I got shot at, cursed at, spat at, threatened. Stokely Carmichael threatened me. I was covering him at the University of Houston in Cullen Auditorium, as a matter of fact. And it was back in the 60s. You can imagine how volatile it was. And Stokely Carmichael was the head guy of the Black Panthers. And he was up on stage, and I had my recorder there. I'd put it where he could record. And he looked at me and said, "And we'll get you next, honky." I said, I just go and take my recorder and walk out. So, and I got caught in the TSU riots. I'll never forget his name. Louis Cuba was 28 years old. Texas Southern University out in Wheeler. They had this big riot, and it sounded like Vietnam battleground. Automatic weapons. And so here again, I was trusted by the cops, so I just moved in with them. Well, we moved across the street. The gym was over there, then the girls' dorm was behind the gym. And Louis Cuba was a 28-year-old patrolman, and he got shot right between the eyes. Killed him instantly. The detective behind me got shot in the face, and man, I hit the pavement fast. And never found out who did the shooting. But I was under a lot of pressure in Houston as well. It was different from the pressure in Dallas because I wasn't news director there. But I had to cover Hurricane Beulah, and I never told my wife of all the narrow calls coming back from Hurricane Beulah in I forgot what year it was, 69 or 70, maybe 71. No, 69, I guess. We were coming back from Hurricane Beulah in Brownsville. It had hit down in the valley. And we lost our news unit because we were caught in a flood. And luckily, I just barely got out as the news unit was washed downstream. So never told my wife about that either. I didn't want to worry her. So I got a call from Bob Rogers. I'd had a convention here in San Antonio, and he called me in Houston and said, "When can you be at work?" Well, I was going to go to New York because I'd been offered a job the day before with Associated Press in New York. and they were going to pay me to move up there, going to start me 5 pay scales up the ladder. Said, we've never done this before, but because of what you've done with the association. So that was the only job offer I had. So we were living out on McKnight Street in Houston, not too far from Post Oak. And I turned to my wife when I got the phone call. I said, New York or San Antonio? And she said, I'm not going to New York. So that was how I got to San Antonio and never looked back, even though it took me about 5 years to recover financially from losing the money from Houston to here. But, and then at Channel 5 for almost 29 years.
KENS TV5 San Antonio.
The split S, the wings over, and the inverted loop are fun. But it was rough on those young pilots some 32 years ago. There's no Red Baron in the skies of the 70s, but Harold Perdue is one of these San Antonio businessmen who relived those nostalgic days of the 1940s. Where are you, Jimmy Doolittle, now that we need you? This is Gary Delaune, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
Eyewitness News. San Antonio's #1 newscast with Michael Marsh. Weather with Ron Taylor. And sports with Gary Delaune.
Well, not that I'm not interested. I've just been so busy with the hurricane going on and everything that I have not been able to keep an eye on sports.
Well, I've kept an eye on sports and an eye on the hurricane.
Oh, you got to do
September
both,
20th, 1967, I was standing near the eye of the Hurricane Beulah. It cost $200 million damage when it hit Brownsville. So, you know,
The
hopefully
last
this
of the
will-
old hurricane hunters.
Yeah, yeah. Well, anyway, perhaps the last of the old sportscasters, too. We don't know. No one was shot. J.R. certainly wasn't. No one could even catch him today. Lone Star J.R. Johnny Rutherford won the Milwaukee 200 as he zipped past Tony Bettenhausen. Jacques Lafitte won the German Grand Prix as he piloted his Ligier Ford to victory in the German Grand Prix. And that was in Hockenheim, West Germany. Pat Bradley won the LPGA tourney in Toronto over Joanne Carner.
You do so well with those foreign names.
I just fool a lot of people.
Yes, really. We'll be back with an update in a moment.
Gary Delaune has a little more on that controversial issue.
The dangerous rattlesnake, lurking, waiting to strike. And as Miss Melita Timmerman found out, it can happen any time, any place. And as doctors fight to save her hand, caution might save your life. I'm Gary Delaune, Channel 5 Eyewitness News. As these youngsters at Esparza receive their awards today, they've realized that Fiesta is not just fantasy and fairy tales, it's motivation. And instead of floats and boats, they've utilized words and books. I'm Gary Delaune, Channel 5 Eyewitness News. I'm Gary Delaune. It's been a great rivalry over the years, but now Lee and MacArthur will meet head-to-head in state playoff competition. And I'll set the stage for you on Eyewitness News at 6. The Bremerton Volunteers will be going after the state title Saturday afternoon in Austin. They'll be center stage. It won't be size and speed. It'll be acting, emoting, and execution. And there's a state championship waiting in the wings. I'm Gary Delaune, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
I'm Gary Delaune. Montreal mauls the Astros, and we'll hear a song about Pete Rose.
That's the news for now. We'll be back at 10. Thank you so much for watching.
Stay out of the sun.
You're not kidding.
And it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed Channel 5. Did sports for 20 years with Dan Cook, and then I did feature reports and other stuff.
And we've seen at least 4 victims taken to these EMS units right here.
Well, it was Fiesta time, the Battle of Flowers, and I was at our station was downtown at the time. We were at 4th and E, which is right behind the San Antonio Express News. And we heard the reports come across the police radio. Shots fired, we have some police officers down. Well, Grayson and Broadway were just about 6 blocks from where we were downtown. So Joe Flortis and I jumped in a news unit. Margot Spitz and Ronnie Smith were already at the scene at Grayson and Broadway. Well, they weren't quite there, but they were down the street. And so Joe and I race up there, and I jump out just as we get to Grayson and Alamo. I jump out and crawl through the fence. I could hear the shots and the windshield all being blown out in this. It was called Broadway Sports Cars, I think. So all these windshields were being blown out. And in the meantime, Margot and Ronnie come back to the corner, so I come back out on the other side, and Ronnie and I pull down toward Broadway, and there's no one there to stop us because the cops are all shot. They're on the ground. And Ira Atterbury had rented a spot at Berghoff Tire right on the end of the parking lot. Paid $10. And that's what they did in those days. They rented parking spots. So Ronnie and I got about 30 yards from the RV, and we could see a guy on top of the Berghoff Tire Company as he was firing tear gas canisters. And people started yelling, get back, it's right there. Well, so Ronnie backs up. Now, this is before the days of wireless. We had to run a cord 150 feet, and I pulled the cord and go down. And I'm just about, even then, with no one to stop me, and bullets had been flying. 2 women right near the RV's door had been killed by Ira Atterbury. I think he had an AR automatic rifle, or maybe I'm not sure. He had an AK-15, or I'm not sure what the caliber it was, but he had 13 weapons and 3,000 rounds of ammunition inside the RV. And what happened was, as he was firing the automatic weapon, his gun jammed. So he'd already shot the cops, 5 or 6 of them. He used to know all their names. And he went back inside the RV, and one of the young patrolmen who got to the scene crawled to the door and crawled up the steps of the RV, and Atterbury was back in toward the kitchen, a part of the RV. And I'm not sure they ever determined exactly what happened, whether he shot himself or whether the cop shot him first, but I think he had 2 bullet wounds. So I think he also shot himself with a pistol, and the cop also shot him. And the tear gas was everywhere. The guy was firing, trying to shoot the tear gas into the RV. And 2 killed, 52 wounded. Could have been the other way if he'd been a better marksman. It'd been 52 dead and 2 wounded. Two women. One was her grandmother, right in front of the RV, were killed. And I'll never forget the young woman with her nephew. He was either 8 or 9 at the time. I'm doing an interview, the blood streaming down her face, and you can still hear the bullets as they hit the window of the liquor store in the corner, and the chaos, the sirens. So I'm squatted on the street, and it was pretty dramatic. And of course, Channel 5, because of the coverage, we won several national awards because of it. And they backed up some of the spectators and new cops that had arrived at the scene were pushing the Air Force bus back toward the RVs so they could use that as a shield to bring the people from their seats. And in the meantime, we didn't know Atterbury. We didn't know who it was. We didn't know till much later it was Ira Atterbury. He had a vendetta against the police department. And he was from Missouri. I think he was 61 years old, and he hated cops. So we speculated the color guard had just passed through, I think from Fox Tech. They had just passed through. Had he waited a little bit, he would have shot a lot of band members because the bands were coming right after the color guard. And I'll never forget that day. And my wife was watching. She was in the kitchen. The kids were watching on TV. I think my daughter was 12 or 13, and my son was 8.
There he shoots again. There, two more. 3.
And they started screaming, "Daddy's going to get killed, Daddy's going to get killed." Because I was going live this whole time. Went live for over 2 hours. And So my wife, when she heard him scream, she dropped the plate and broke it in the kitchen and ran in there and saw that I was doing the reports. And she called Ray Dudley, who was then assignments editor, and she said, "Tell him to get his ass out of there." 2007, I got a call that they'd put me in the Texas Radio Hall of Fame. And that was a great honor because of, I mean, you had some of the great voices, Walter Cronkite, Frank Glaber, Charlie Jones, who was NBC, and my gosh, Dan Rather. They were all in the Hall of Fame. And then in 2015, well, first off, I was in the Lone Star Basketball Hall of Fame. A group of basketball coaches had founded this Hall of Fame group, and I was the only broadcaster in it at that time. And that was, I forgot what year that was. And then I got a call one day from Southwest Texas State. Barbara Tidwell was the founder and director of the Southwest Texas State Strutters, one of the greatest dance teams in the world. And you've seen the girls on the sideline of football games, you know, they do the halftime kicks and all that. Beautiful. You had certain qualifications you had to have. It's almost like a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader. So I got a call that Barbara and the young president, she was the president of the Strutters at the time, and she said, "Can you come up and do a story?" I said, "What about?" She said, "We have a new vice president, and he wants to disband the Strutters. He doesn't think it's the image that Southwest Texas should have." Well, they were LBJ's favorite dance team. He had them dancing all over the world, and he would have them dance in the White House lawn and stuff like that. But anyway, so I go up and I do a story, a 4-part story, a series on the Strutters. Well, people got up in arms. So I got a call several months later, said, "We're having a special meeting of the Strutters and a reunion. Can you come up?" Yeah. So my wife and I went up to Barbara Tidwell's house, and they inducted me into the Texas Strutters Hall of Fame. So I'm the only male. O.C. Haley and I were the only two. O.C. died a couple of years ago, so I'm the only male Strutter Hall of Fame member. And so that was a lot of fun. And then the San Antonio Radio Hall of Fame a few years ago. And the big honor, of course, was the the San Antonio Sports Hall of Fame, which is the picture up here on the wall, and that's in the Alamo Dome. And so I think I'm the only, as far as I know. Dan Cook, of course, was more for his newspaper career, but he was also the first sportscaster, I think, in '59. But I'm the only other member of the media that I think that's in the San Antonio Sports Hall of Fame. But what an honor that was. And I still don't know how I got in there or why they wanted me in there, because there were a lot of guys far more qualified than I. So, but that was a big, big honor. I mean, geez, to be in there with Gervin and guys like that, and Kyle Rote, and you know, the names of sports history. And all the movie, because I was in television a lot here, I was interviewing Merrill Connolly, John Connolly's brother. And John was mentioned as a possible vice president running mate for Richard Nixon. If he had never changed parties, John Connolly could have been president. He changed parties, became a Republican rather than staying with the Democratic Party. But anyway, I was in Merrill's office down in Floresville, and I'm sitting there, and this young lady walks in, Liz Kegley. Well, she did a lot of casting for Universal Studios in Hollywood. And she said, "Gary, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm interviewing Merrill here, talking about John." And she said, "No, what are you doing for the next 2 weeks?" I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I want you to be cast in a movie. And it's called it was initially called the Battle Creek Brawl. And if you know who Jackie Chan was, it was his very first movie in the United States."
Jerry, you're a dark horse in this Battle Creek Brawl. Nobody knows much about you. What do you think your chances are?
I believe in myself. Some others believe in me.
$15,000 is a lot of money these days. What do you plan to do with it? Let's get back to action. Thank you, Jerry Klein.
And I was in that movie, and I had to do a take. One of the takes was nine takes because he couldn't remember, he couldn't speak English, and he had to hear the word as his cue. So I did that movie, and then I got another call, said, we'd like you to come over and be in this movie. I said, what is it? He said, it's called Johnny Be Good, with Michael Anthony Hall and Robert Downey Jr. So I was in that movie.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gary Delaune. Today, throughout the country, hundreds of boys will be sending their national letters of intent. Now, these letters are commitments by high school seniors to play for the college of their choice. Today, there's no place across the country that has more media coverage and more attention than right here, Ashcroft High School. I'm at the station one day, and the phone rings, and he said, is this Mr. Delaune? Yes, it is. This is so-and-so. I'm at Universal Studios in Hollywood. I said, yeah, I thought somebody, yeah, okay, yeah. We'd like for you to come to Austin. I said, what for? He said, we want you to audition for this part we have. I said, what's the movie? He said, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And I said, no, I don't think so. I didn't know who was in it. It was Dolly Parton, Burt Reynolds, a great cast. But, and see, it was taken from a play, and it was from the Chicken Ranch in LaGrange. That's what the story was about. I didn't know what it was about. And then they got a guy named Don Colson, who was the anchorman at Channel 12, paid him about $12,000 or $15,000. He put in a swimming pool in his house. I didn't know if it was anything like that. I would have probably taken it. And when I came here, we didn't have news or sports on weekend. We had 5 days a week. We had news and sports at Channel 5. We didn't have anything on weekends. I mean, can you believe that? 1971, I came here. No news or sports on weekends. The best time that people watch sports is Sunday night, because you know, it's like Channel 12. They have that 30-minute show. Channel 4 has a 30-minute show. I think 5 does too. And I can't imagine that they wouldn't have weekend sport, but things have changed so much. This was a smaller, one of the smaller markets. It was 39th or 40th in the market size for television, and not to have weekend news or sports. So Bob Rogers hired me to do news. I was going to do the 10 o'clock news. But when they found out I was that I knew sports, he put me over into sports as well as news, and they hired Chris Maru in 1973 to do news. Gene Tuck was the first 10 o'clock reporter on weekends, and then Chris Maru came, and of course Chris became Mr. San Antonio as far as news anchors are concerned. And I did sports for 20 years with Dan Cook, and then for another 8.5 years I did regular features and stuff like that. She was a West Texas girl, and that's the love of my life, and the thrill of my life was meeting her in Dallas at St. Paul Hospital. I went by to get a story on a guy that was crushed to death, and she was part Cherokee Indian, and she was so beautiful. You can see her picture up there. And she wouldn't give me the time of day. So I had to go through the hospital's PR guy to get her name and number and everything. And she didn't want to go out with me at all. And I remember so vividly, the first date I had, I took her to see Sean Connery's first James Bond movie. It's called Dr. No. And I used to tease her. I said, honey, we went to see Dr. No, but there was yes, yes in your eyes. She was absolutely gorgeous. 54.5 years we were married. And she was 24 when I met her. She was the youngest emergency room supervisor in St. Paul Hospital history. It was a Catholic hospital, and she got her training through the Daughters of Charity, a wonderful hospital in Dallas. And she was just a wonderful person. And it's been a whole different ballgame without her being around, because she was the matriarch of the family. She made major decisions other than, you know, my work or whatever. I don't know what, my kids will move into this house eventually, because I don't want to wander around in here. And I used to tease her all the time. I'd say, well, listen, I talked to your daddy, and I said, I told him I'd trade 6 horses and a rifle for you, you know, as your bounty.
So she was wonderful. They say, who are your favorite? Elvis Presley was one of my favorite interviews. What a funny story. I was in Houston, and so I didn't want to send one of my staff guys out. He was getting in from Vegas about midnight or later. He had been on stage in Vegas, so I went myself to not Love Field, but to Hobby International. So he's later and later, so here he finally arrives about 2:30 in the morning. Well, I've waited out there, only 3 of us there. Everybody else is gone. Houston Post reporter, me, and the photographer. And so Elvis gets out. He had his own DC-9, and he had on that white suit that he'd been on stage with. He had on that scarlet scarf that he always wore, and white patent shoes. He gets off. No security. There was no security out there. Can you imagine? This is 1968. So we're in the lobby there, and so he comes in, and he said, "Hey, man, thank you guys for staying out this late, you know. I really appreciate it." And so he sits down. I said, "Elvis, it's apparent from your wardrobe transformation that your sartorial splendor is something different from your old days." And he said, "What'd you say, man?" He said, "I know what you meant." So we interviewed him, and so it was in the paper the next day in my quote. So Colonel Parker called a news conference because he was appearing at the Houston Stock Show. So we get there early, and I take Joe with me because she wanted to see Elvis. So I get there, and early, and I put my recorder up on the desk because this is radio, and so I stand over against the wall. Well, here comes Colonel Parker with his big stogie and Elvis starts for the desk. He said, "Hey, Gary, come here. Sit with me up here." He said, "I don't know anybody here. Come up here and sit with me." Well, the kids are all going gaga, you know. And so after a news conference, he goes back to his hotel. They said, "Hey, do you know Elvis?" I said, "We go back a long way." So I had just met him the night before. But he was such a nice guy. And then John Wayne was in Dallas, and so Eddie Barker, that's when, after I'd left KLIF, went to TV. I went to go interview John Wayne. He's being honored tonight. So I went over to the Sheraton Hotel, Southern Life building, and so he was coming down the stairs, and we did both radio and TV for KRLD. So he sees me, and he comes over, and he didn't have his toupee on. I said, "Mr. Wayne." He said, "Mr. Wayne, hell, I'm Duke." I said, "Okay, Duke, we're going to do it." He said, "Gary, I can't do it." I said, "What?" He said, "It's in my contract. I cannot do a TV interview without my rug." So I just did radio. Well, 2 years later, I'd moved to Houston by that time, and I get a call from Interstate Theaters. They said, "Do you want to interview John Wayne? He's doing a movie called Hellfighters out on the Ship Channel." It was about Red Adair, who was the great oil well firefighter. So I go out there and reintroduced myself. We laughed about what happened before. So I pick up, after 30 minutes, I pick up my radio tape recorder. He says, "Where are you going?" I said, "Duke, I'm going back to Houston." He said, "The hell you are. You're going to stay here and have lunch with me because it's my 62nd birthday." So, you know, I get to have lunch with John Wayne on his 62nd birthday. And then a few years ago, when my daughter was still at the stock show, she wanted me to do a promo about the show. So she said, "If I can get Roy Rogers, can you do the interview?" I said, "Heck yeah." So I talked to Bob Rogers. He said, "Yeah, go out to California and do it." So I get to California. We fly into Orange County, and so we get there early up at Roy Rogers Museum in Apple Valley. So like you, Jeff Haster set up with the camera early. So I go out and start walking around. So here comes Roy rushing in. He said, "Gary, where have you been, man? I've been out there looking for you." I said, "You've been looking for me?" You know? I said, "You're the superstar cowboy." And he said, "Yeah, I wanted to get in here and talk with you." So I said, "My gosh, you know, Roy Rogers looking for me to do an interview, and Duke Wayne, and I'm interviewing Allie McGraw, and she was married to Steve McQueen. And so we're talking, and McQueen comes in, "Come on, Allie, come on." Steve, you just wait a minute, I'm talking with Gary here. So he rushes out in a huff. And so, you know, little things like that. And then I'm talking to Sandra Dee. We're having lunch. And Bobby Darin, same attitude as Steve McQueen. Come on, come on. She said, I'm not through with the interview yet, Bobby. So, you know, little things like that. And you remember those kinds of things. So Ann Blythe, who was a great actress, singer at one time, she's doing The Sound of Music at the theater and around in Houston, Sharpstown. And I knew the young couple that was producing it. They called me one day and said, Gary, we'd like for you to be in The Sound of Music with Ann Blythe. I said, what? They said, yeah, you don't have to sing. You got a speaking part. Well, I wouldn't do it because I was still working for the Astros. I couldn't get off for 2 weeks to do it. I got a call in Houston. I will tell you that they said, oh, listen, would you come out to the, I forgot what hotel it was. We want you to interview Betty Grable. Betty Grable, my gosh, the pin-up girl from World War II? Yeah. Well, I get out there, and she'll do the interview, but she said, I'll only do it if we have subdued lighting, because she did not want me to see that she had wrinkles or anything. And people say, who are the prettiest women you've ever met? I said, well, you won't believe this. I said, the 2 sweetest movie stars, women that I ever met. One was Kim Novak, and 2 was Jacqueline Bisset. You remember Bullet?
Oh, yeah.
Steve McQueen? She was a sweetheart. And Kim Novak opened the door and said, come in. And we joked and had fun and laughed. I've got all kinds of pictures of Kim Novak and Jacqueline Bisset both. And when I went to, she was at the red carpet inn in Houston. I knocked on the door, and she said, Gary, I've been expecting you. Come on in. The next hour is yours. You're mine, you know. And boy, she was gorgeous. And the best-looking older star I ever met was Sid Charisse. She was married to Tony Martin. She was in Singing in the Rain. Oh, my gosh, she was beautiful. 66 years old. I thought she was about 50. She was absolutely gorgeous. And the ones I was kind of disappointed in was Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's such a short guy. You know? Yeah. I expected a big, brawling guy, you know. Yeah. And he was so small. But it was still fun. But yeah, those people, you remember things. It's just amazing. The stars and those that you were. But when I was a mail boy, I got to meet all these stars in Hollywood, you know, because I'd go out, it's like we're sitting here, I'd go out in the morning, I'd get there early, and I'd go out and sit in the CBS lobby. No telling who'd walk in. Tyrone Power, or Yul Brynner, or somebody, you know. And they were normal people. They weren't like they are today. And as I say, you know, they were just down-to-earth people. It was a job to them. It's not like the super egos that they have today. And it was so much fun living in Hollywood when I lived there. I was driving down to Santa Monica one night in my old beat-up 53 Plymouth, and a waves at me. I didn't know who it was, Johnny Carson. They had a strike, electrician strike in LA. So I was being in the mailroom, they knew my background. They said, we need you over at TV City. I said, for what? I said, well, don't you have some experience in audio? I said, yeah, in Oklahoma. He said, well, then why don't you go to TV City, because we need you to work for that. Well, you know, you wouldn't do that today because they call you a scab and all that. But so my job was to be the boom mic operator. The platform up here, and I have to, and they were doing a show called The Red Mill, Shirley Jones, Jack Cassidy, Donald O'Connor, Mike Nichols, and Elaine May. And so I got to know Donald O'Connor pretty well. He was getting a divorce, and he was really shaken up about that. And we sat on the movie set, and we sat on the curb, and he told me about it. Well, we talked for 2 weeks. I was on the scene. Well, years later, I got a call from, I don't know who called me and said, why don't you go over and interview Donald O'Connor at St. Anthony? So I go to St. Anthony, and we reminisce about the days we spent doing the TV show in TV City. And he tried to get me to show me a little dance step, and it didn't work. So, but he was just a great guy. But those people were normal. They didn't. It wasn't like you were dealing with God. So I loved every minute of it. I mentioned Jimmy Wakely, that he was going to take care of me after I got hurt. But I had dated his daughter once, and she worked at CBS. Her name was Deanna. And so I was making $52 a week. That's what I was making. So she said, Gary, I asked her if she'd go out to a movie or something. She said, why don't you come out to our house, because we're going to go see a play at Hollywood High School. My sister's in a play. I said, sure. Well, here I am driving in this very exclusive area off Beverly Hills, and this serpentining driveway, Cadillacs, Mercedes, 53 Plymouth. So I'm sitting there, and Jimmy really liked me because he was from Oklahoma City. He was just an Oklahoma cowboy. He got his start with Gene Autry, and he's the guy that, I'm back in the saddle again. He was the one that played that every week for Gene Autry. So I'm sitting there, and he said, Gary, I want you to meet this young lady. It's our neighbor. And he said, this is Meredith McRae. I said, hi. She was about 14. She was the daughter of Gordon McRae. And Bob Hope was about 4 doors down, you know. I mean, and so we're going into the play, and her name was Linda. And so Jimmy said, his name was Pete, his 13-year-old son. He said, Pete, you ready to go? He said, yeah, Dad, but I want to ride with Gary because I've never seen a car that old. So it was so funny. But they were just normal people. And you know, looking back, I wouldn't trade it for anything.